Ladies and gentlemen, please turn off your phones for this sacred moment. The host's voice echoed through the marble hall of the Emerald Bay Grand Ballroom in Seattle just before the orchestra was about to start. Laughter and soft chatter filled the air. Crystal glasses chimed under the chandeliers. Then, in the silence that followed, the host raised his arm and pointed straight toward the entrance. "Except him," he said. "He's not allowed in." Every head turned. My face, aged calm, unmistakable, flashed across the 40-foot LED screen behind the stage, framed in bright red letters that read, "Do not enter." Gasps rippled through the crowd, then nervous laughter. Guests lifted their phones anyway, recording the scene they'd be gossiping about for months. I stood there motionless, in my dark charcoal suit, holding the gift envelope I had prepared for my son's wedding. I didn't shout, didn't flinch. I only said 5 words quietly, clearly, like a verdict. Cancel the wedding. 20 minutes later, the lights went out. The music stopped and my son was arguing with the manager. I sipped my wine, watching chaos bloom where there had been order. Calm power has its own kind of thunder. My name is Richard Callahan. I am 66 years old. I spent 40 years building a logistics company that began with 1 delivery truck and ended with 23 routes across the Pacific Northwest. I don't scare easily. But that night, standing at the doorway of my son's wedding, I realized that fear has many disguises. It doesn't always come with a knife. It can arrive wearing a tuxedo, smiling, and call you Dad. Aaron Callahan, my only son, 36 years old, the pride of my youth, the child I raised alone after the divorce, was marrying a woman named Lila Torres. She was the kind of woman who spoke softly, but always watched a room like she was measuring it. I came early as fathers do. I parked near the valet entrance, adjusted my tie, and checked the time. 5:45 p.m. I was right on schedule. The security guard stopped me before I could reach the main doors. Both were tall-suited and serious, wearing earpieces. One held up a tablet with my photograph displayed. "Are you Mr. Richard Callahan?" "Yes," I said, confused. "I'm the father of the groom." "I'm sorry, sir," the taller one replied. "We have explicit instructions not to let you enter." I thought it was a mistake. I laughed. "That's absurd. My son's getting married in there. He'll clear this up." The guard didn't laugh. "Sir, these orders were provided directly by Mr. Aaron Callahan this morning." The words hit me like cold water. My son, my own son. Before I could answer, a black SUV pulled up. Margaret, my ex-wife, stepped out wearing a silver dress. She looked straight at me, expressionless, then took Lila's hand and walked past. The guards parted for them without hesitation. "Margaret," I called. "Tell them this is a mistake." She didn't even slow down. Behind them, guests began to arrive, colleagues, old family friends, people who had eaten at my table 100 times. They avoided my eyes. Some whispered, some filmed. No one asked why. Humiliation, when it's public, has a sound. It's the faint laughter of people pretending not to look. I could have made a scene. I could have shouted or forced my way in. Instead, I did something I'd learned long ago in business. When you lose the room, don't lose your mind. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I took photos, the guards, the entrance, the faces of the guests watching. I documented every second. One of the guards muttered into his earpiece, "He's not leaving yet. We might need backup." I smiled faintly. "No need. I'll leave on my own." But before walking away, I reached into my pocket and pressed a small black button on my car's remote. A signal blinked once green. I turned and walked calmly through the parking lot. By the time I reached my car, the ballroom lights flickered. Then everything went dark. I sat behind the wheel of my Mercedes, watching the confusion through the glass doors. Guests murmured, phones lit up. The orchestra faltered mid-song. I poured a small glass of wine from the bottle in the passenger seat, raised it to the chaos in the distance, and whispered to myself, control regained. People think revenge begins with anger. It doesn't. It begins with clarity. I started the engine and drove away from the ballroom past the glittering waterfront lights toward the quiet edge of Elliott Bay. I parked at the pier, rolled down the window, and breathed in the salty air. The humiliation still burned under my skin, but beneath it, something else was forming a hard, crystalline calm. I took out my phone and opened the voice recorder. April 18th, 2024, 7:04 p.m. I was denied entry to my son's wedding by his explicit order. Witnesses approximately 50 people, including my ex-wife, Margaret Evans, and her companion, Lila Torres. No explanation given. I stopped the recording, saved it, and titled it Incident Log 001. The truth is, this wasn't entirely unexpected. For months I had felt something shifting between us, between father and son. Missed calls, vague excuses, polite distance that felt too rehearsed. And behind all of it, the new woman smiling always near. I opened my glove compartment and took out an old notebook. I wrote 2 words on the first page, Phase 1. The rain started to fall lightly over the bay. I leaned back and watched the water ripple, thinking of how small acts of betrayal begin, like hairline cracks in glass. They start invisible. You only see them when the whole pane shatters. At 8:00 p.m., I received a message from Peter Nolan, my lawyer and closest friend. Rick, I was just turned away at the door. They said my name's on the restricted list too. What's happening? I looked at the screen for a moment and typed back. Meet me at my house in 1 hour. Bring your notebook. We're going to need it. I started the car and drove home. The streets of Seattle glistened with rain and headlights reflecting the city like a mirror broken into light. My mind wasn't on the humiliation anymore. It was on the next move. At my house, I went straight to my study. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. On the wall hung the blueprint of my first shipping route framed decades ago. I unlocked the small wall safe and took out several folders labeled Callahan Freight Line, Ownership Estate Planning 2019, and Trust Accounts. I placed them on the desk side by side. My life's work in paper and ink. When Peter arrived, I poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He looked pale and furious. They said I was blacklisted Rick. At your son's wedding, what the hell is going on? I handed him the photos from my phone. He scrolled silently, his jaw tightening. They humiliated you, he said. No, I corrected. They underestimated me. I leaned forward. We're going to document everything. Every transaction, every call, every connection. Quietly. Legally. Peter nodded slowly. You're planning a counterattack. I'm planning a lesson, I said. They wanted to treat me like an outsider. Fine. Let's see how they manage when they realize I built the walls they're standing inside. Outside, thunder rolled low over the bay. Inside, I opened a new file on my computer and typed its title in bold, Operation Legacy. I didn't know it yet, but that night when my face glowed red under the words, "Do not enter," wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. Peter Nolan sat across from me in my study, his pen tapping nervously against the rim of his whiskey glass. The rain had turned heavy outside, drumming against the wide bay windows. My desk was buried beneath a neat chaos of legal folders, property deeds, and a single open notebook labeled Operation Legacy. You're serious about this, Peter said, finally. A full investigation against your ex-wife, against your son's wife. Not against, I replied calmly. For clarity, Peter sighed. Clarity can destroy what's left of your family. I met his eyes. Clarity doesn't destroy anything that wasn't already broken. He nodded, resigned. Then you'll need someone discreet. Someone who doesn't show up on phone records. I already had a name in mind. Cole Mercer, former federal investigator turned private operator. I had used him once before to trace internal leaks during a logistics contract in 2018. He was methodical, invisible, and allergic to gossip. Peter leaned back. You'll also need to prepare for the fallout if you find what you're afraid you'll find. Peter, I said quietly, what I'm afraid of is that I won't find anything, that all of this humiliation was for nothing, that my son truly meant it. The silence that followed was longer than any storm. By morning, the decision was made. At 8 sharp, I called Cole Mercer. He answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, professional, and devoid of small talk. Mr. Callahan, he said, I read the article about the wedding. I assume this is related. Indirectly, I answered, I need confirmation. Quietly, legally. I'm not looking for scandal, I'm looking for facts. Names Margaret Evans, my ex-wife. Lila Torres, my son's new wife. And if necessary, my son, Aaron Callahan. Scope financial, digital, and personal. Track connections, communications, anything that doesn't align. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, understood. You'll have preliminary findings within 2 weeks. I don't have 2 weeks, Mr. Mercer. They're already moving pieces I can't see. I need something sooner. You'll get what's real, he said, and hung up. The next days passed like a low hum of controlled tension. I went to the office as usual, signed documents, nodded through meetings, pretended to laugh at jokes. I was a man wearing his own mask. Every evening I sat in my study and wrote updates into my notebook date. Contacted Mercer, received confirmation, set timeline. The handwriting was steady, almost mechanical. But beneath it all, my mind replayed that red-lit screen at the wedding, my face branded with rejection. By the 4th day, Cole sent a brief text, meeting requested. Private location, bring no one. We met that night at a small coffee shop in Ballard that stayed open late. Cole was already there when I arrived, seated by the window, a plain man in a gray coat and baseball cap. He could have passed for anyone, an accountant, a delivery driver, a neighbor. Perfect camouflage. Mr. Callahan, he greeted, not looking up from his black coffee. I started the usual sweeps. Public records, financial databases, phone logs. You were right to act fast. Tell me, I said. He slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were printed bank statements and photographs. 2 months before the wedding, a joint account was opened at Seattle First Bank under the names Margaret Evans and Lila Torres. Deposits made monthly $5,000 each. None of these transactions trace back to your son. I frowned. So Lila's been financed by Margaret, appears that way. Possibly since before she met your son. Cole's tone was detached, surgical. Also, surveillance footage from March 2023 shows both women at a charity gala in Portland. They weren't strangers when your son met her in July. I stared at the photograph, 2 women side by side laughing in evening gowns, champagne glasses raised. Margaret's hand rested lightly on Lila's shoulder. The image was sharp, time-stamped, undeniable. Cole continued. I've also flagged a meeting between them and a financial consultant, same man who represented Margaret during your divorce. He currently works for an estate planning firm. The air in the cafe suddenly felt colder. What are they planning? I asked quietly. Cole shrugged. Too soon to say. But based on patterns, it looks like financial positioning, either influence over your assets or preemptive legal claims. I exhaled slowly, steadying my voice. Keep going, I want everything. Dates, documents, witnesses. He nodded, closing his folder. You'll have a full report within the week. But Mr. Callahan... Yes, prepare yourself. The truth always costs something. That night back home, I didn't sleep. I spread the photos across my desk, Margaret and Lila at the gala, the bank statements, the consultant's card. Each paper was a fragment of betrayal, and together they formed a map. I drew a timeline on the whiteboard behind my desk. March charity gala. May joint account. July. Aaron meets Lila. September communication with my son changes. December wedding preparations. April humiliation. Patterns. Always patterns. That's how I'd built my business, seeing the currents no one else saw. Now, for the first time, those same instincts were saving me. At 2:00 a.m., I called Peter. "You were right," I said. "There's proof, transfers, meetings, photos. They've been planning this for over a year." Peter's voice was heavy. "Rick, what are you going to do? I'm going to protect what's mine. But I'll do it quietly." 3 days later, Cole returned with the full file. He arrived at dusk, the rain turning the street into a silver mirror. I led him into the study. He set down a metal briefcase, entered a code, and opened it. Inside were 3 folders, color-coded and labeled. "Financial, personal, and legal," he said. The full picture. He laid them out like evidence in a courtroom. In the financial folder, complete records of the transfers totaling $60,000. In the personal folder, surveillance photos of Lila meeting Margaret 6 times in the last year, always in low-profile restaurants or suburban cafes. In the legal folder, notes from the estate consultant who had discussed potential restructuring of Callahan Holdings pending familial transition. "Familial transition," I murmured. "That's their euphemism for replacing me." Cole remained silent, professional, his expression unreadable. I flipped through page after page. Lila's signature appeared on a document authorizing her as consultant for a nonprofit shell company Margaret had founded 2 years earlier. The entity had no staff, no activity, only a tax ID and a bank account. "They built a channel," I said. "A funnel for my money to move through." Cole nodded once. "And the timing of the transactions aligns with your son's increased distance. Emotional manipulation accompanied by financial positioning. It's classic isolation strategy." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. 40 years of building, 1 year to dismantle. Cole closed the case gently. "What do you want to do now?" I looked at the wall where the old company blueprint hung. The lines of the map glowed faintly in the desk lamp's light. "I want to do what builders do," I said quietly. "Reinforce the foundation before the termites eat the house." After Cole left, I sat in the dim light for a long time. The clock ticked steadily. The rain softened outside and the house was silent except for my own breathing. I opened a new folder on my computer and titled it Estate Revision, Phase 2. Then I picked up my pen and wrote in my notebook, "Confirm all holdings. Secure trust documents. Prepare new will draft. Protect legacy." When I finished, I closed the notebook and looked at the photograph on the desk, Aaron at age 10, grinning beside the first delivery truck we'd ever bought. His hands were covered in grease, his hair messy, his smile genuine. "What happened to you, kid?" I whispered. When did ambition turn into greed? I didn't expect an answer, only the quiet click of the rain tapping against the glass, steady and relentless like the heartbeat of time itself. Somewhere in that sound, I found my decision. I would not rage. I would not beg. I would not fall. I would build again. And this time, the foundation would be unbreakable. The morning light broke through the blinds, cutting thin silver lines across my desk. I had fallen asleep in the armchair, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, the folders from Cole Mercer spread around me, like a courtroom frozen in time. The smell of cold coffee lingered. My phone buzzed, and for a moment I hoped it was Aaron. It wasn't. It was Peter Nolan. "Rick," he said, his voice steady but urgent. I reviewed Mercer's report. "This isn't small. What they did, it's structured fraud." I rubbed my temples. I suspected as much. I've handled dozens of corporate betrayal cases, Peter continued. This is identical. They used alimony funds as operational capital layered through a nonprofit disguised as charitable spending. Except the charity, I said, was dismantling my family. He was silent for a beat. You need to act before they move again. We can freeze certain accounts temporarily, at least. Not yet, I said. They'll know I'm watching. I want them comfortable, still confident, still talking. Peter sighed. You're turning this into a chess game. It already was, I said. They just didn't realize they were playing against the man who built the board. By noon, I was at the bank. The manager, a thin man named Carlson, who had worked with me for 20 years, greeted me nervously. Mr. Callahan, I received your message. You want to review joint accounts connected to Margaret Evans, yes? I just need confirmation of activity. No flags raised, no calls made. He hesitated. You know, of course, that confidentiality ends when fraud begins? I interrupted calmly. You and I both know that's true. He nodded. Within minutes, he produced digital copies of Margaret's account transfers. Each was labeled as consulting payment from the so-called nonprofit. The money trail was unmistakable. The deposits came directly from my old trust account set up after the divorce to ensure her stability. I looked at the screen, seeing my own generosity turned into ammunition. How many months, I asked. 14, he said softly. Consistent amounts. Increasing slightly toward the end. 14 months. The same duration as her connection to Lila. The same span it took to turn my son against me. I left the bank without another word, walking slowly through the rain-slick streets. Seattle smelled of wet asphalt and coffee, the city humming with its usual indifference. But to me, everything looked sharper, clearer, as if the world had adjusted its focus just to show me the truth. That evening, Peter came to the house. I handed him the bank printouts. He looked over the numbers, eyebrows lifting. This is perfect. Exact dates, exact transfers. We can prove fraudulent use of funds and undue influence. You've got everything you need. Not everything, I said. I still need motive. Motive is money, Peter said. Not only money, I countered. Margaret always wanted control. Control over perception, over people. When she couldn't control me, she moved to control my legacy. Peter nodded slowly. And Lila's the executioner, I said quietly. The pretty face of someone else's plan. He poured himself a drink, his voice dropping lower. Rick, you understand this will split your family permanently, right? There's no reconciliation after legal action. I smiled faintly. Peter, they already threw me out of my son's wedding. Tell me what's left to reconcile. Later that night, after Peter left, I found myself walking through the house aimlessly. The walls were lined with photographs, my children's graduations, family vacations, Christmases when we still pretended to love each other. Each image felt like a lie carved in glass. In the living room, I paused before a picture of Aaron at 17 holding his first acceptance letter from college. I remembered how proud he had been, how he'd hugged me so tight I could feel his heartbeat against mine. You did it, Dad, he'd said. We did it. Now that same boy had weaponized my trust, handed it to the people who wanted me erased. I picked up the photo frame, stared at it for a long time, then set it back down. You'll see, son, I whispered. You'll see what they did to both of us. The next morning brought news from Mercer. He called at 7 sharp. Mr. Callahan, he said, I've expanded the search. You might want to sit down. I'm listening. Records indicate that Lila and Margaret co-signed a document at a notary office last June. I pulled the footage. It's surveillance grade, but clear enough. They were there for nearly an hour. The notary confirmed they filed a durable power of attorney, naming Lila Torres as Margaret Evans's representative for certain estate matters. My pulse slowed, not quickened. Years of business negotiations had taught me how to keep my voice steady when my stomach turned to stone. What kind of estate matters? Language is vague, future joint ventures, and asset transition planning. It's essentially a skeleton key. If you hadn't acted, they could have used it to maneuver your old company shares during any incapacitation event. Meaning, if I had a stroke tomorrow, I said my ex-wife's proxy could have started signing my name. Exactly. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the line. Then I said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. That's enough for now." When the call ended, I went to the window. The rain had stopped. The morning sun hit the edge of the water like liquid fire. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not the gentle kind, but the kind that comes before precision. By afternoon, I had a plan. I drove to the offices of Nolan and Associates. Peter was already waiting in the conference room, stacks of legal pads in front of him. "We're restructuring everything," I told him. "New will, new trust, new company structure. I want every clause bulletproof." Peter adjusted his glasses. "You're removing Aaron from the will entirely?" "Temporarily," I said, "until the truth is undeniable. And the company transferred into a trust. Grace will oversee it with you as legal custodian. I want stability, not sentiment." Peter nodded slowly. "You're turning your life into a fortress." "Exactly," I said. "And when they realize they can't breach the walls, the masks will fall on their own." He scribbled notes, the sound of his pen cutting through the quiet. "You'll need witnesses for some of these documents." "I already have one in mind," I said. "Grace." That night I sat at my desk again, the city lights reflecting off the bay like broken glass. I pulled a fresh page from my notebook and began listing what still needed to be done. File preliminary trust documents. Schedule appointment with notary. Secure company ownership. Contact Grace. Discreetly, I stopped writing and leaned back, closing my eyes. I could almost hear Aaron's laughter from years ago, back when he was still my shadow following me through warehouses, asking how logistics worked, how I managed so many employees with calm precision. He used to say he wanted to be just like me. "Careful what you wish for," I murmured. Because now he was about to meet the man he wanted to become. At 11:30, my phone vibrated again. A text from an unknown number. "You should stop digging, Rick. Some truths hurt more than lies." I stared at the message, then typed back, "I built my life on truth. Pain doesn't scare me." The reply came instantly. "Then be ready for what you find next." I set the phone down and smiled faintly. Fear had always been the preferred weapon of cowards. I'd faced bankruptcies, accidents, union strikes, and 30 years of market storms. A threat in a text message wasn't going to make me flinch. Instead, I turned off the lamp and let the city light fill the room. Tomorrow I would start rewriting the future one signature at a time. Grace arrived just after sunset, her headlights sweeping across the wet driveway. I had asked her to come alone. The sound of her heels on the hardwood echoed softly through the hallway before she appeared at the door of my study, hesitant but determined. "Dad," she said quietly, "you sounded serious on the phone." "I am," I replied, closing the file I had been reviewing. "I need your help with something delicate." Grace took a slow breath, eyes flicking toward the wall behind me, where photographs and documents were pinned in neat rows. "This looks like an investigation," she murmured. "It is," I said. "One that concerns our family." She sat down across from me, folding her hands. "You mean Aaron?" "And your mother," I added. Grace's face tightened. What did she do this time? I turned the monitor toward her. On the screen were photographs Cole Mercer had gathered, the charity gala, the notary visit, the shared bank account. Grace leaned closer, disbelief spreading across her expression as each image came into view. She knew her, Grace whispered. Mom knew Lila before Aaron even met her. Yes, and for over a year they worked together financially and strategically. Grace shook her head. Why would she do this? She's already got money from the divorce. Greed isn't about need, I said evenly. It's about control. And she's always hated losing it. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. So what happens now? Are you going to confront her? Not yet, I said. First, we rebuild our defenses. I'm restructuring the company, the will, the trust. Everything that matters will be locked beyond reach. But I'll need witnesses and your cooperation. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Whatever you need, Dad. We worked late into the night sorting documents into labeled stacks. The room smelled of paper and ink, the air heavy with the kind of silence that only honesty can bring. Grace read through the new trust papers with the focus of someone twice her age. She paused over one page. You're removing Aaron from the inheritance, she said softly. Temporarily, I replied, until he learns what family means. That could take forever. Then forever is what it will take. She studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. You're still teaching lessons even now. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. We signed and notarized preliminary drafts that night. Grace's signature was steady, her resolve clear. When she finally left, I walked her to the door. Dad, she said before getting into her car, you're doing the right thing. Just don't lose yourself in it. I smiled. I lost myself when I saw my face under a red warning sign. I'm only getting it back. The next morning, I returned to the office for the first time since the wedding incident. The staff greeted me cautiously, as if unsure how to approach a man who had been publicly humiliated, yet walked like nothing had happened. I entered the boardroom for the quarterly review. The senior managers stood quiet. I could sense their pity, their curiosity. I didn't care for either. Gentlemen, I began placing my briefcase on the table as of today. Callahan Freight Line will be undergoing a complete legal restructuring. Ownership will transfer to a family trust managed jointly by myself, my daughter Grace, and an independent fiduciary. A murmur swept through the room. The CFO cleared his throat. Sir, may I ask what prompted this decision? Family requires protection, I said simply. And protection requires structure. They didn't need to know more. In business, power didn't require explanation. It required clarity. When the meeting ended, I stepped out onto the balcony that overlooked the bay. The sky was a hard steel gray, the air damp and sharp. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. That evening, Peter Nolan came by with fresh documents. The new trust papers are ready for notarization, he said, setting the thick folder on my desk. Once signed, the company is untouchable. No one outside the trust can access assets without dual authorization. Good, I said. We'll schedule the signing within the week. Peter hesitated before continuing. Rick, I've also spoken to a colleague in family law. He agrees that you have grounds to file a civil suit against Margaret for fraudulent use of alimony. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed him one. How strong is the case? Rock solid, Peter said. But it will get ugly. She'll fight back. I expect her to, I replied. But she won't win. Peter leaned back in the armchair, studying me. You've changed, you know. You used to talk about forgiveness. I still believe in forgiveness, I said. I just don't believe in repeating mistakes. He nodded slowly. You sound like a man at peace. I'm not at peace, I said, staring into the amber glass. But I'm in control. For now, that's enough. Around midnight, I received another call from Mercer. His tone was brisk, all business. I have one last piece of the puzzle, he said. Margaret met with your son 2 weeks before the wedding. The location was a lawyer's office downtown. I obtained a photo from building security. Send it to me, I said. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. The image loaded slowly. Margaret and Aaron seated across from a man in a dark suit, papers spread before them. Aaron's expression was uneasy, but he was there participating. "What was the meeting for?" I asked. "Preliminary review of a power of attorney clause," Mercer said. "It appears your ex-wife convinced him to consider signing over temporary authority for certain estate assets in the event of your declining health." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "Declining health," I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Mercer continued. "Fortunately, nothing was signed, but it proves intent. She's been preparing to take legal control through your son." For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then I said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Send me the originals. You've done enough." "Are you sure?" he asked. "There's more I could—" "No," I interrupted. "From here, it's my turn." When I hung up, I stood alone in the darkened study. Outside, fog rolled across the water, swallowing the city lights one by one. I walked to the wall of evidence, photos, receipts, timelines, and drew a red circle around the date of that lawyer meeting. Underneath it, I wrote one line in bold ink. "They tried to make me invisible." Then I drew another line beneath it. "Now they'll see everything." The house was quiet, the kind of silence that precedes transformation. I turned off the lamp, poured myself one last drink, and raised it to the ghosts of the past. "To truth," I said softly, "the most expensive weapon of all." Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, the first sound of an approaching storm that would soon wash the lies clean. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and polished wood when I arrived with Peter Nolan early that morning. We walked side by side through the echoing corridor, our footsteps mixing with the murmur of clerks and the soft shuffle of papers. The air held that peculiar stillness of places where decisions change lives. Peter carried the file marked Evans versus Callahan, fraudulent misuse of alimony funds. His expression was neutral, practiced, but I could see the satisfaction flickering behind his eyes. He'd been waiting for this case since the day I showed him Mercer's photographs. Inside the small legal office, a court clerk notarized each of my signatures on the complaint, the affidavit, the motion to freeze assets. I watched the pen move smooth and slow, and thought about how many times that same hand had once written love letters instead of legal accusations. When it was done, Peter looked up and said, "It's officially filed. She'll be served by tomorrow." "Good," I said simply. "Rick," he added, lowering his voice, "this isn't going to stay quiet. Once it hits her, she'll retaliate. I'm counting on it." We left the courthouse and walked into the drizzle outside. Seattle traffic moved lazily along the waterfront. Across the street, a man was selling roasted chestnuts, and the smell mixed oddly with the rain. Peter stopped at the corner. "You don't look relieved." "I'm not," I said. "Relief doesn't come from paperwork. It comes from truth, and she hasn't faced it yet." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll handle the legal front. You focus on your next move." As I drove home, windshield wipers sweeping rhythmically, I replayed everything: the charity gala, the forged documents, the moment Margaret looked through me at Aaron's wedding like I was already dead. Some people kill with bullets. Others kill with silence. When I got home, the first message waiting on my phone was from an unknown number. "Congratulations, Richard. You've declared war. Hope you're ready to lose. No name, no signature, just arrogance." I smiled faintly. I'd spent my entire career surviving wars, economic, legal, political. The difference now was personal stakes. I poured myself coffee instead of whiskey and sat at my desk. War required discipline. That afternoon, Grace stopped by. She brought a basket of groceries and a cautious smile. "Peter called me," she said. "He told me about the lawsuit." I looked up from my computer. And I'm proud of you," she said softly. You finally stood up to her. I chuckled. Standing up isn't the problem, Grace. It's staying standing. She put a hand on my shoulder. You've done harder things. I wanted to believe her. But fighting your ex-wife isn't like fighting a business rival. Businessmen don't know your fears. Margaret did. I showed Grace the file of evidence Mercer had collected, the proof of financial fraud, the power of attorney, attempt the notary visits. Her face hardened as she read through it. She used Aaron, Grace said, finally. Turned him into a weapon against you. She did, I said quietly. But he still chose to believe her. Grace hesitated. Do you think he'll ever realize what she's done? I hope so, I said. But realization isn't redemption. It's just the first step. 2 days later, Margaret struck back. Peter called early in the morning. She's filed a counterclaim, he said. Defamation, emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. I laughed. She's creative, I'll give her that. She's also dangerous, Peter warned. She's hired Keller and Haynes, the most aggressive firm in the city. I expected nothing less. He sighed. We'll respond formally, but this will get loud. Then we'll stay quiet, I said. Noise is for people without evidence. The next week blurred into a cycle of depositions, notarizations, and signatures. Every document felt like another nail, sealing the coffin of a marriage that had died years before. But one evening, as I sat reviewing old bank ledgers, I found something unexpected. A small transaction, $500, transferred from Margaret's account to one labeled Elias Foundation. I almost ignored it until I noticed the date the same week Aaron introduced Lila to me. I opened my archives and searched for that name. It appeared again listed under donor sponsorships for the gala where Margaret and Lila were first photographed together. It wasn't random. It was the connection that tied everything. The Elias Foundation was the shell nonprofit they had used to move my money. The pattern was complete. I called Peter immediately. I found the bridge, I said. He sounded startled. What bridge? The one that connects motive to method. I sent him the screenshots. He exhaled sharply through the phone. This is perfect. We can prove intent now. Then we use it, I said. When she tries to discredit me in court, this will be the hammer. Rick, he said carefully, don't let this become vengeance. Keep it about justice. I paused. You think there's a difference? For most people, no. For you, yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, the lights dim. The sound of the bay came faintly through the windows. I stopped in front of the fireplace where an old wedding photograph still hung, Margaret in white, smiling, holding my arm. We'd been young then, stupid enough to think love was immune to pride. I took the frame down and set it face down on the mantel. I didn't need it anymore. The next morning, Mercer arrived with a new report. Surveillance confirmed, he said. Your son's wife met with Margaret again 3 days ago at a downtown cafe. Duration 30 minutes. Tone tense. They argued. What about? He shrugged. Couldn't get audio, but body language suggests money. Lila looked agitated. Margaret looked desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, I said. He nodded. And Margaret just made hers. She withdrew $50,000 from her secondary account the same day. Where did it go? Nowhere traceable yet. Probably cash. I smiled slightly. She's hiding assets. Perfect. Mercer looked at me, expression unreadable. Most people would say, you're winning. Winning, I said quietly, is when I don't have to keep score anymore. By the end of the week, the first court summons for Margaret arrived at her residence. Peter forwarded me the acknowledgement of receipt. I read it once and set it aside. That evening, I went to the pier and stood overlooking the water. The wind was cold, sharp, clean. I thought about Aaron, where he was, what he believed, whether he still thought I was the villain in someone else's story. A man builds his name with decades of work and loses it in a single lie. But I knew the truth always resurfaces like driftwood after a storm. When I returned home, I turned off every light except the one in my study. I wrote in my notebook, Phase 3 complete asset restructuring. Wait for her response. Observe silence before strike. Then I closed the book and whispered into the still air. The foundation is secure. Somewhere in the darkness, thunder rolled again, distant, deliberate, like applause from an unseen audience. The storm I had set in motion was finally gathering strength. The rain had turned to mist by the time I pulled into the parking lot of the coffee shop in Pioneer Square. Peter Nolan was already inside, sitting at the back booth with 2 black coffees and a manila folder between them. The look on his face told me this was not a social meeting. "Rick," he said as I slid into the seat across from him, "we've got traction. Mercer's been digging deeper." He opened the folder and pushed a few photographs toward me. Lila and Margaret side by side again, this time in daylight outside a small financial office on Pine Street. The timestamp read 3 days ago. "They're still moving," Peter said. "Probably shifting money before the freeze order goes through." I studied the photos, then the receipts clipped beneath them. 2 wire transfers each for $10,000 routed to a trust account under the name Harbor Consulting Services. Another shell company. "She's desperate," I said quietly. Peter nodded. "Mercer says they're getting sloppy. He's got someone following the paper trail through the bank's back channels. We'll know more soon." I took a sip of coffee. "When this ends," I said, "I don't want her destroyed. I want her exposed." "That's more dangerous," Peter replied. "Destruction is clean. Exposure leaves witnesses." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." By noon, Mercer called me directly. His tone was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction beneath it. "Mr. Callahan, the data you asked for is complete. I've compiled 3 sets, financial, photographic, and timeline. I suggest we meet in person. You'll want to see this." We met later that evening in my study. He arrived precisely on time, a steel gray briefcase in hand. He set it on the table, entered a code, and opened it to reveal 3 thick binders, each labeled in black marker. "Start with this," he said, handing me the first one. The financials. The pages were meticulous bank statements, transfer slips, transaction records, each annotated with dates and source accounts. "She's been funding Lila since before the engagement," Mercer said. "Direct deposits under aliases through secondary accounts. The total sum over 15 months, about $60,000. He turned to another page. "And this joint investments in the Elias Foundation, registered to both names. That's your funnel." I flipped through the pages silent. Every figure, every line, confirmed what I had already suspected, but hoped was paranoia. Mercer handed me the second binder. Photographic evidence. Meetings, lunches, notary visits. 12 separate encounters in 14 months. The images were crisp, undeniable. Margaret and Lila together at a notary office, leaning close over a stack of papers. The next, a discreet cafe in Bellevue, heads bowed in conversation. Another, the 2 leaving the same lawyer's building that Aaron had been seen entering before the wedding. Finally, Mercer handed me the 3rd binder, the timeline. "Everything aligns," he said. "From their first recorded meeting in February last year to the day of the wedding. The pattern is deliberate, planned manipulation, not coincidence." He closed the briefcase. "You now have what most men never get, proof beyond denial." I stood there for a long moment, hands resting on the binders. "You've done excellent work," I said quietly. "Send copies to Peter's office. The originals stay with me." Mercer nodded. "Understood. I'll have them delivered by morning." As he left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not relief, not victory, but certainty. The kind that only comes when the fog finally clears, and what's left beneath it is as sharp as steel. After Mercer was gone, I poured myself a drink and stared at the wall. The evidence pinned there had grown into a mural of betrayal. Dates, photographs, bank transfers, all connected by red string. I added one final note at the center, April 26, 2024. Expulsion. The day my son had me thrown out of his wedding. From that date, every line of evidence radiated outward like cracks in glass. I followed each one with my eyes, how it all began, long before the wedding. How every step had been calculated, how every lie fit perfectly into place. My phone buzzed with a new message. Grace. Dad, are you okay? Peter said you've been working nonstop. I'm fine, I typed back, but I've seen everything now, and I know exactly what needs to happen next. The following morning, Peter arrived at my house with coffee and a notepad. He looked more like a strategist than a lawyer. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes sharp. Mercer delivered the full file, he said. It's airtight. I opened the first binder on my desk. Then, it's time to make it legal. I want new will drafts, new power of attorney, everything rewritten from the ground up. Peter hesitated. You're restructuring the estate before the trial even starts. By the time the trial ends, it'll be too late. This isn't about money, it's about control. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. We'll do it right, step by step. Good, I said. And Peter, I want Grace included. She's the only one who hasn't failed me. I'll make sure she's listed as co-trustee. Not just co-trustee, I added. She's the future of this family. She'll be my witness for everything. Peter smiled faintly. Your daughter's turning into quite the ally. She's my only ally, I said. That night, the house felt quieter than usual. The rain had stopped completely, and the city outside hummed like a distant memory. I sat at my desk, opened a blank notebook, and began writing the new plan. Confirm trust, restructuring with Peter. Finalize asset protection. File lawsuit evidence to court. Prepare Grace's witness statement. Confront Aaron, but only when everything is signed. I paused, staring at that last line. Confront Aaron. The thought filled me with something I couldn't quite name. Not rage, not sorrow. Something heavier. A father should never need to prove his integrity to his son. But here I was, ready to do it with notarized documents and evidence strong enough to move courts. I closed the notebook and stood walking to the window. The reflection staring back at me in the glass didn't look like a broken man anymore. He looked like someone who had learned to fight differently, without fists, without shouting, without fear. Outside, fog drifted over the water, thick and slow. It reminded me of the early days of my business, how I used to drive those long coastal roads alone. Headlights slicing through the mist, never knowing if the next turn would lead to success or disaster. Back then, it had been instinct that guided me. Now, it was clarity. The phone on my desk buzzed again. A text from Peter. Everything set. Meeting with notary in 2 days. Bring Grace. I typed back, perfect. It's time. Before bed, I walked through the house one last time. The walls were still lined with old photographs, birthdays, graduations, family dinners. I stopped at one of Aaron as a child, sitting on my shoulders, laughing, his small hands gripping my hair. I gave you everything, I whispered, and you gave me lessons in return. I placed the photo face down on the shelf, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the dark. The evidence was gathered, the strategy was set, and the storm was moving exactly where I needed it to go. By morning, it would no longer be about pain or betrayal. It would be about precision. The time for questions was over. The time for consequences had begun. The courier arrived just after dawn. I heard the soft knock on my front door before the sound of rain could swallow it. When I opened it, a young man in a dark jacket stood there, holding a sealed silver case with my name printed neatly across the top. Delivery for Mr. Callahan. Signature required. I signed, thanked him, and closed the door. The house was still half dark, the gray morning light cutting narrow lines across the floor. I set the case on my desk, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down in silence. For a moment, I didn't move. The air felt heavy, like the pause between two breaths. Then I unlatched the locks and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was organized with surgical precision. 3 black binders, 1 flash drive, and a sealed envelope labeled Mercer Investigations, Final Report. I unfolded the letter first. Mercer's handwriting was steady, precise. Mr. Callahan, the dataset is complete. Financial, digital, photographic. Every detail has been verified. Handle it carefully. It's heavier than it looks. He was right. I opened the first binder. The financials. Every number, every transaction, every account, each one highlighted and cross-referenced. The money flow was clear now. Funds leaving Margaret's account, entering the nonprofit, resurfacing under the Elias Foundation, and finally routed to Lila's personal savings. I traced the lines with my finger like a map of betrayal. The second binder was the photographic record. Dozens of images, high-resolution time-stamped. Margaret and Lila at restaurants' parking lots, the notary's office. Some were grainy from distance, others sharp enough to see their smiles. In one they stood outside a law firm. I recognized one that had handled my corporate filings a decade ago. The third binder was a timeline. It began in March of the previous year and ended the night of the wedding. Mercer's analysis filled the margins. Coordinated activity. Intentional isolation of subject Mr. Callahan. Behavioral manipulation of family members via emotional leverage. I closed the binder and leaned back. There was no room left for doubt. For the first time since that night at the ballroom, I felt something close to peace, not joy, not vindication, but stillness. By noon, Peter Nolan arrived. He didn't knock. He'd been given a key months ago. Coffee, I asked. He nodded, setting his briefcase on the table. Mercer dropped by my office. I've reviewed the files. And it's airtight, Peter said. You could build a fortress on this evidence. Fraud, conspiracy, undue influence, all provable. I've already spoken to a judge about fast-tracking the asset freeze. I handed him the flash drive. You'll need this. The digital logs complete the circle. Peter took it, then looked at me carefully. You've seen everything, yes. And you're calm. Calm, I repeated. Finally. He gave a small smile. Then I assume you're ready for the next step. I am. We start reconstruction tomorrow. Peter's eyebrows lifted. Reconstruction? The will, I said. The trust, the company, everything that carries my name. That afternoon, I spread the folders across the desk, covering the surface like a general mapping a battlefield. I pinned new copies of key documents to the wall, bank transfers, photographs, timelines. Red strings connected the pieces, tracing the pattern of deceit. In the center, I placed a photograph of Aaron and me from years ago, taken in front of our first warehouse. Beneath it, I wrote in bold letters, "Rebuild." The air smelled of paper, ink, and determination. One by one, I began drafting notes for Peter, new clauses for the estate revisions, for company share succession plans that no one could touch without unanimous consent. The pen moved quickly, confidently. Hours passed unnoticed. When I finally looked up, the daylight had faded to the dull gold of early evening. Grace arrived just before dinner. She stepped into the study and stopped, eyes widening at the wall of documents. "Dad," she whispered, "you've turned this room into a crime lab." "Into a truth lab," I corrected gently. She looked around, walking slowly toward the photographs. "Is it all proven beyond question?" Her gaze lingered on the photo of her mother and Lila. I thought Mom was manipulative, but this is something else. She's not just manipulative, I said quietly. She's strategic. She plays the long game. She just forgot who taught her to play it. Grace turned to face me. So what happens now? I gestured to the folders. Now we make it official. The will is rewritten, the assets protected. And we make sure that no one, no matter what they say, can ever weaponize our family name again. Grace nodded, her eyes glassy but resolute. Then, I'm with you. Later, after she'd gone to bed in the guest room, I sat alone in the study again. The night outside was quiet, the city muffled by fog. I turned on the recorder I'd been keeping since the wedding and spoke softly into it. January 4th, 2024. Evidence confirmed. All links verified. The truth is complete. Tomorrow the reconstruction begins. I paused, then added, when you've spent a lifetime building, you learn how to rebuild faster than anyone expects. I clicked the recorder off and leaned back, letting the silence fill the room. The next morning, Peter returned with fresh drafts. We spread the documents across the table, the new will, the revised trust, the corporate restructure. Each paper was a small piece of order carved out of chaos. Peter read the clauses aloud while I reviewed them line by line. Section 3, he said, revokes the previous division of inheritance. Grace Callahan remains primary beneficiary and co-trustee. Aaron Callahan excluded pending future review. Good, I said. Section 5 transfers majority control of Callahan Freight Line to the family trust. Governance by a 3-person board, yourself, Grace, and the independent fiduciary from Global Wealth Management. Excellent. That ensures oversight. Peter looked up. Rick, you understand this gives you protection beyond your lifetime. You're turning your company into something bigger than family politics. That's the point, I said. Legacy isn't blood, it's endurance. When everything was signed, I stood and looked around the study. The morning light hit the wall of documents, glinting off the pushpins like stars in a constellation of truth. Peter packed up the files, then paused by the door. You've done it, he said quietly. You've taken back control. I smiled faintly. Control was never lost, only borrowed. He nodded once and left, for a long while after I stayed standing there, staring at the wall. The truth was ugly, but it was mine. And in that ugliness, I found something clean. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the shimmer of the bay. I walked to the window and whispered to the reflection of my own face. They thought they wrote the ending. They forgot I write faster. I turned off the lights, closed the binders, and locked the case. Tomorrow the signatures would turn into shields, and the legacy would become untouchable. The file of truth was complete. Now came the part I had been waiting for, the will rewritten. The notary's office sat on the top floor of an old sandstone building downtown, its brass door handles polished to a quiet gleam. Grace and I arrived early, the smell of rain still clinging to our coats. Peter was already there, waiting in the reception area with his leather briefcase, open papers neatly aligned. Morning, he said, standing as we entered. I've reviewed everything twice. Once these are signed, your legacy will be legally sealed. Grace squeezed my arm gently. You ready for this? I nodded. More than I've ever been. The notary, a calm, silver-haired woman named Carla Jensen, ushered us into a small conference room. The walls were lined with books and certificates, the air humming faintly from the rain outside. She set out the documents in careful order, her tone professional and deliberate. Mr. Callahan, she said, will proceed in sections. Please read each clause carefully before signing. I sat at the table, pen in hand, the first page in front of me. My name printed in bold. The new will. The trust. The company transfer. Peter read aloud each clause. Clause 1. Revocation of prior testamentary documents. Clause 2. Declaration of successor trustees, Grace Callahan and Global Wealth Management. I initialed every page without hesitation. Grace signed next to me, her hand steady. By the time we reached the final document transfer of corporate control, the notary glanced up. Mr. Callahan, this clause effectively removes all discretionary powers from any future family claimants not listed in the trust. Do you understand? I do, I said. Then please sign here. I pressed the pen to the paper and wrote my name, each stroke firm, final, certain. The notary turned the page, affixed her seal, and handed me the completed copies. The sharp scent of ink filled the room. It was done. When we left the building, the rain had stopped, and the city was washed clean. Grace held the folder tight against her chest, as if it were a living thing. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, we wait for them to realize they've lost. Peter joined us by the curb. Margaret's lawyers will react fast when they find out. But the trust is sealed, the assets are protected. Even a court order can't reverse this without cause. And Aaron, Grace asked softly. Peter hesitated. He'll find out soon enough. These things travel fast. I looked out toward the skyline, the clouds breaking into thin streaks of sunlight. Then let him learn the truth the way I did document by document. That evening, back at the house, I stored the notarized documents in the safe behind my desk. The click of the lock echoed through the quiet room like a gavel. I poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed one to Grace. To clarity, I said. She smiled faintly. And to consequences. We clinked glasses. The amber liquid burned just enough to remind me I was alive. After Grace went to bed, I sat alone at my desk. My phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. He knows, no name, no context, just 2 words. I stared at the screen. There was no doubt who it referred to. Aaron. The next morning, I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. The phone rang before sunrise. It was Peter. Rick, he said quickly. I just received notice from Keller and Haynes. They're requesting a meeting on behalf of your son. My son, I repeated. Yes. Not Margaret. Aaron. They're claiming misrepresentation, undue influence. And Peter paused as if reluctant to say it, mental incompetence. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He's accusing me of being unfit, not directly, Peter said. But they're building the groundwork. They're implying your decisions were coerced. Coerced by whom? By Grace, he said quietly. I laughed not from amusement, but disbelief. He's letting them pit him against his sister now. That's the strategy, Peter replied. They want to fracture your witnesses, discredit the trust, and stall the court proceedings. It's a long game, but we can counter it. Then we will, I said. An hour later, Grace came downstairs, still in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. What happened? She asked when she saw my face. Your brother hired a lawyer, I said simply. She froze. Aaron, yes. He's claiming I wasn't in a sound state of mind when I signed the documents. That you manipulated me. Her mouth fell open. That's insane. He knows I didn't. He doesn't know anything anymore, I interrupted. He just believes what they tell him. Grace sat down across from me, eyes glistening. So what do? We do what we've always done, I said calmly. We tell the truth, and we document everything. I handed her the extra copy of the notary certification. This paper is stronger than his lies. 2 days later, Peter and I met with a judge in chambers. The preliminary hearing was private, no press, no noise, just law. Peter presented the notarized trust, the witness statements, and Mercer's investigation report. He spoke calmly, fact by fact, dismantling their accusations one by one. When he finished, the judge leaned back in her chair. "So you're asserting that your client acted entirely of his own free will?" Peter nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Every decision was deliberate and properly executed. We can provide independent verification of all signatures and dates." The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Then I see no reason to grant a temporary injunction on the trust. The documents stand." A quiet relief spread through me, but I didn't show it. Victories were fragile at this stage. Peter gathered the papers and handed me a reassuring look. "It's holding Rick. For now." "For now," I echoed. When I got home that evening, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No postage, no return address. I picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside was a single printed photograph, Aaron and Margaret sitting together at what looked like a cafe. She was speaking. He was listening, head bowed. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, were 4 words: "Family over everything always." I turned the photo over again and stared at their faces. My son looked younger, somehow smaller. Margaret looked triumphant. For a moment my hand trembled. Then I placed the photo on the table, took a deep breath, and tore it neatly in half. Later that night, I recorded a new entry on my voice log. Day 1 after reconstruction, I said quietly, "Legal challenges anticipated. Emotional manipulation continues through secondary channels. But structure holds. I hold." I paused, glancing toward the dark window where my reflection hovered against the rain. They thought they could win by turning love into leverage. But love isn't a contract, it's a test. And they failed. I ended the recording and sat back listening to the sound of the storm outside. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt unshakable. Tomorrow they would push harder. But now I had a fortress and the patience of a man who had already walked through fire and come out clean. The call came on a Friday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the last streaks of gold faded into gray. My phone buzzed across the table, and when I glanced at the screen, I froze. "Aaron." After months of silence, my son was calling. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Aaron." There was a pause on the line, a silence thick with hesitation. "Dad," he said finally, his voice subdued. "We need to talk. About what?" "About everything," he said. "I want to see you, face to face." I could hear traffic in the background, maybe a car door slamming. He sounded nervous the way he used to before job interviews. I leaned back in my chair. "Where?" He hesitated. "There's a cafe downtown, the one near Union Square, tomorrow noon." "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the dark window. The city lights shimmered in the glass like a constellation of choices. I wasn't sure what I expected from him, apology, explanation, or more manipulation. But whatever came, I was ready. The next day I arrived early. The cafe was quiet, half empty, filled with the faint hum of espresso machines and rain tapping against the windows. I ordered black coffee and took a corner seat where I could see the entrance. Aaron arrived 10 minutes late. He looked older, though only months had passed. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow. When he spotted me, he froze for a moment, then approached cautiously. "Dad," he said, pulling out the chair opposite me. "Aaron," I replied. For a few moments, we just sat there, the silence between us louder than words. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "I came to understand." "Understand what?" He took a breath. "Why you did it. The trust, the will, the lawsuit against Mom. Why you cut me off like a stranger." I watched him carefully. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup. You want to understand, I asked. Then you'll need to start with the truth. I know what Mom told me, he said quickly. Then you don't know the truth, I interrupted. He frowned. She said you were manipulated, that Grace made you turn against her, against me, that you're not thinking clearly. I laughed once, quietly. Your mother has always been good at rewriting history. Tell me, Aaron, did she also tell you about her connection to your wife before you met her? He looked startled. What are you talking about? I reached into my briefcase and slid a thin envelope across the table. He stared at it, but didn't touch it. Open it, I said. Inside were several photographs, Margaret and Lila sitting together at a restaurant dated a full year before Aaron and Lila supposedly met. Another image showed them entering a notary's office together. Aaron's face went pale. This isn't possible. It's not only possible, I said, it's documented. Margaret and Lila conspired long before your so-called love story began. I have bank records, phone logs, witness statements. She didn't fall in love with you, Aaron. She was hired to control you. That's a lie, he whispered. It has to be. Then why were they transferring money to the same account for over a year? Why did she withdraw cash from a foundation your mother created with my alimony funds? He shook his head, eyes darting back and forth as if the facts themselves were too heavy to hold. You're wrong, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. You're bitter. You're trying to make me hate her. I don't need to make you hate anyone, I said evenly. You just need to stop refusing to see what's in front of you. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. A few patrons turned to look. You can't prove any of this, he snapped. Actually, I said quietly, I can. Every document, every photo, every timestamp. It's all real, and the court knows it. His jaw tightened. Mom said you'd destroy the family just to get even. Your mother destroyed the family when she turned you into her weapon, I said. I'm simply disarming it. He sank back into his chair, staring at the table. The anger drained out of him, leaving something else, fear, confusion, maybe guilt. Dad, he said softly, if this is true, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. You'd already chosen a side. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't know. I thought she... His voice faltered. I thought she loved me. She loved what you represented, I said. Access, legacy, control. The moment I cut that off, she lost her reason to stay. Aaron looked up sharply. You mean she left me? I didn't answer. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a broken laugh. She filed for divorce yesterday. I remained silent. She said I'd changed, he said bitterly. That I was no longer useful. I didn't even understand what she meant until right now. He dropped his head into his hands. For the first time, I saw not a defiant man, but the boy he used to be, the boy who used to follow me through the warehouse asking questions about everything. When he finally looked up again, his eyes were red. What happens now? That's up to you, I said. You can keep defending the people who destroyed us, or you can start rebuilding what they tried to erase. He swallowed hard. Would you even let me? I looked at him for a long moment. Rebuilding trust takes more than an apology, Aaron. It takes proof of character, actions, consistency. He nodded slowly, the weight of it settling on him. Then tell me where to start. Start by testifying, I said. Tell the court what you know. Tell them what you've seen. Tell the truth, not for me, but for yourself. He hesitated. Mom will hate me for it. She already used you, I said. What's left to lose? When we left the cafe, the rain had returned light and steady. Aaron stood under the awning, staring out at the street. Dad, he said, his voice low. I was wrong. I turned to him. I know, I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want to make things right. Then do it, I said, and do it quietly. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I'll talk to Peter. I'll give him whatever he needs. I clasped his shoulder, the gesture brief, but heavy with meaning. That's the first step. We stood there for a moment, two men divided by years of misunderstanding, bound now by truth. As he walked away into the rain, I felt the first crack of something long frozen begin to thaw. That night I sat at my desk and opened my recorder again. Day 43, I said. Aaron has seen the truth. The walls are beginning to fall, not by force, but by their own weight. Lies collapse when no one holds them up. I paused, staring at the rain outside. I don't know what comes next, I said softly. But maybe for the first time in months, I believe in the possibility of something better. I clicked the recorder off and leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the storm. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet streets, faint, fragile, but still burning. The following week passed in a blur of phone calls, legal drafts, and restless nights. Peter was working double shifts preparing for the next court date, and Grace was coordinating with the accountants to finalize the asset transfers. But beneath the surface of this controlled storm, I could feel something shifting, a calm before an inevitable reckoning. On Thursday morning, I received a call from Peter. Rick, he said, his tone firm, but measured. We just got confirmation. Margaret has been subpoenaed. The judge has accepted the motion to compel her financial records and communication logs with Lila Torres. I exhaled slowly. Then it's finally happening. Yes, he replied. But brace yourself, her attorney is furious. They'll try to spin this as harassment or vengeance. Let them try, I said. The truth doesn't need a publicist. Peter chuckled dryly. You really have changed, you know. The old you would have been out for blood. The old me didn't know how much silence can hurt, I said. Now I do. By Friday, the evidence Peter had submitted officially became part of the record. Bank statements, notary documents, phone logs, all laid out before the court. Margaret's carefully curated image as the wronged ex-wife was beginning to crack. I arrived early at the courthouse that day, the same marble steps where I had stood months ago to file the first lawsuit. The autumn air was crisp, the city alive with quiet noise, cars, voices, the wind in the trees. Grace met me at the entrance, her eyes determined. She's here, she whispered. I followed her gaze. Margaret stood across the plaza, surrounded by two lawyers. She looked smaller than I remembered, her posture stiff under the weight of pretense. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a warning. Peter joined us moments later, briefcase in hand. Let's go inside, he said. It's time. The courtroom was smaller than expected, intimate and tense. Margaret sat at her table, Lila noticeably absent. I took my seat beside Peter, Grace just behind me, as a silent witness. The judge entered, and the murmurs ceased. Peter stood first. Your Honor, he began, this case is not about resentment. It is about deception calculated over months, executed with precision, and funded with misused assets. We will show proof, irrefutable documented proof, that the defendant used funds from her alimony to manipulate and control the plaintiff's family for personal gain. Margaret's attorney rose immediately after. Your Honor, what my colleague describes is nothing more than a bitter man's attempt to punish his ex-wife for moving on. The so-called evidence is circumstantial at best and emotionally motivated at worst. The judge raised a hand. We'll see. Proceed. Peter called the first witness, Mercer. He took the stand with quiet professionalism, his words precise, his tone controlled. He presented photographs, timestamps, financial links. For every denial from Margaret's side, Mercer had a document ready. The notary records, the shared phone numbers, the charity gala photos showing her and Lila side by side a year before the supposed first meeting with Aaron. Each slide that appeared on the courtroom monitor felt like another nail sealing her deception shut. Margaret's composure faltered only once, when the notary footage appeared showing her signing papers alongside Lila. Her attorney objected, but the judge allowed it. Peter turned to her calmly. "Mrs. Evans, can you explain why you and Ms. Torres visited this notary to execute a document months before your son's engagement?" Margaret shifted in her seat. "It was business-related," she said. "A small real estate matter." "Real estate," Peter repeated. "The document in question references financial guardianship rights. That's not a property purchase, is it?" She hesitated. "I don't recall the specifics." The judge's voice cut through the air. "Then perhaps you should have before walking into my courtroom." A ripple of subdued laughter moved through the spectators. When court adjourned for the day, Peter and I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. He loosened his tie and smiled faintly. "She's cornered. The documents speak for themselves." "Cornered people still bite," I said. "Don't underestimate her." As if summoned by the words, a familiar voice called my name from behind. "Richard." I turned. Margaret stood there alone now, her lawyers inside. Her smile was gone. "You think you've won?" she said quietly. "I don't need to win," I replied. "I just need the truth to be louder than your lies." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You've turned our children against me. Grace testifying, Aaron withdrawing from me. You call this justice. I call it consequence," I said. "You built your kingdom on deceit. I just took away the foundation." For a moment something flickered in her eyes. Anger, then exhaustion. "You always needed control," she whispered. "Even now you're trying to prove you're the hero." "No," I said, stepping past her. "I'm proving I'm still standing." I walked away without looking back. That night I sat in the study with Grace. The house felt different, lighter somehow, though the weight of the coming verdict still hung in the air. Grace poured us tea, not brandy this time. "Aaron called me," she said. "He's testifying next week." I looked up. "He's ready?" "He's terrified," she said softly. "But he's ready." I smiled faintly. "Good. Fear means he's human again." She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Do you ever regret it, Dad?" "Any of this?" I took a moment before answering. "Regret belongs to people who had other options. I didn't. If someone poisons your family, you don't apologize for cleaning the wound." Grace nodded slowly. "I just hope Aaron can see it that way someday." "He will," I said. When the noise fades. The following morning, I received an email from Peter marked confidential. I opened it, and my pulse slowed as I read the contents. Attached was a bank statement, Margaret's personal account showing a sudden deposit of $250,000 from an unknown corporate entity. The date was 2 days before the first hearing. I called Peter immediately. "What is this? I think she sold something," he said. "Or someone paid her to stay quiet." "We're tracing it now. Trace faster," I said. "Because whatever this is, it's her last move." That evening, as I stood on the balcony watching the rain fall over the bay, my phone buzzed again. It was Aaron. "She called me," he said quietly. "Mom. She said she's leaving Seattle, that she's done fighting." I was silent for a moment. "Did she say where she's going?" "No. Just that she's tired, and that she hopes someday we'll forgive her." "Do you believe her?" I asked. Aaron exhaled. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then believe what you saw," I said. "Not what you're told." He was quiet for a while before saying, After this is over, can we try again? I closed my eyes, feeling the years of silence between us, closing inch by inch. One day at a time, son, I said. That's all we can do. When the call ended, I stayed there for a long time, watching the city lights shimmer against the water. The war was almost over, but the rebuilding had only just begun. Somewhere deep inside, I knew tomorrow would bring the final blow, the one that would end her game for good. And for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. The morning of the final hearing arrived gray and windless, the kind of day that felt suspended between endings and beginnings. I woke before dawn, dressed in silence, and stood for a moment by the window, overlooking the bay. The city was still the water flat as glass. For the first time in months, I felt neither dread nor fury, only inevitability. Grace met me downstairs holding 2 travel mugs of coffee. She handed me one with a small, tired smile. "Whatever happens today," she said softly, "we've already won." I nodded, though I wasn't sure victory was the right word. "We've endured," I said. "That's what matters." The courthouse steps were already crowded by the time we arrived. Reporters, curious spectators, and lawyers hovered near the entrance like restless birds. The story had leaked high-profile entrepreneurs suing his ex-wife for fraud and conspiracy. I ignored the cameras, the murmurs, the flash of light as we walked past. Inside, Peter was waiting near the courtroom doors. He looked calm, composed, but there was a spark in his eyes. "The judge reviewed the new evidence last night," he whispered. "The offshore transfer sealed it. This is the last day, Rick." "Let's make it count," I said. The courtroom was silent when the session began. Margaret sat at her table, expression neutral, though the shadows under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Aaron was there too, sitting quietly in the second row beside Grace. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod when our eyes met. It was enough. Peter began his closing statement. His voice was clear, confident, but devoid of theatrics. "Your Honor, this case was never about money," he said. "It was about betrayal. The betrayal of trust between family members, the manipulation of one man's legacy for personal gain. The evidence speaks plainly. Mrs. Evans used alimony funds to finance and coordinate a deception that targeted her former husband and their son. This was not misjudgment. It was design." He gestured toward the large screen where Mercer's final report appeared: bank records, digital messages, the notary's video. Every connection documented, every lie exposed. Justice is not vengeance, it's restoration. When Peter sat down, the judge nodded gravely and turned to Margaret's lawyer. "Your rebuttal." The man stood, voice sharp with desperation. "Your Honor, my client may have made mistakes, but this portrayal of her as some criminal mastermind is exaggerated. The plaintiff's narrative depends entirely on circumstantial interpretations. Yes, Mrs. Evans knew Ms. Torres prior to her son's marriage, but friendship is not conspiracy. Financial support is not fraud." The judge listened without interruption, face unreadable. When the lawyer finished, she looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Evans, you may speak for yourself before I rule." Margaret stood slowly, smoothing her blazer. Her voice was soft, almost frail. "Your Honor, I loved my family. Everything I did because I wanted to protect what was ours. Richard has always been controlling, always, Mrs. Evans." "Evans?" the judge interrupted. "I've reviewed the records. Protection does not require secret accounts, falsified signatures, or power of attorney documents executed without disclosure." Margaret faltered, her mouth opening and closing. "Sit down, please," the judge said. The room fell silent again. For a few long moments, the only sound was the turning of paper. Then the judge spoke, her tone measured and deliberate. After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented by both parties, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Richard Callahan. A faint gasp rippled through the courtroom. The court further orders restitution of funds totaling $540,000 plus legal costs. Additionally, due to the established pattern of manipulation and coercion, all prior agreements regarding alimony are hereby nullified effective immediately. Margaret's shoulders sagged as the words sank in. The judge continued, her gaze steady. This court does not punish family disputes. It corrects abuse of trust, and trust once broken carries a price. The gavel struck once sharp and final. Afterward, the hallway outside the courtroom was a blur of movement, reporters calling out questions, cameras flashing, lawyers shaking hands. Peter placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. Grace hugged me tightly, tears streaking her face. "You did it, Dad." I shook my head. "No, we did it." Aaron approached, slowly hesitant. For a moment he seemed unsure whether he was welcome. Then he spoke. "I testified truthfully," he said. "The court didn't call me, but Peter said the written statement helped." "It did," I said. "And so did you." He nodded, his expression heavy with remorse. "I don't know how to fix what I broke." "You don't fix it," I said gently. "You learn from it." He swallowed hard. "I want to start over, if you'll let me." "Start with honesty," I said. "That's all I've ever asked." He nodded again, eyes glistening. Grace stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, watching my children embrace, I felt something I hadn't in years: wholeness. Not perfect, not complete, but real. That evening, the house was quiet again. Peter joined me in the study for a final toast. The documents from court were stacked neatly on the desk, the embossed seal catching the light. "To truth," he said, raising his glass. "To peace," I replied. We drank in silence for a while before Peter asked, "What now?" "Now," I said, "I rebuild. Not companies, not wealth, just family." He smiled. "You've earned it." When he left, I sat alone, staring at the folder on the desk, the case that had consumed nearly a year of my life. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I opened my voice recorder one last time. "Day 70, I said quietly. "Judgment delivered, truth acknowledged. The cycle ends here." I paused, searching for words. I used to believe revenge would feel satisfying. It doesn't. What feels right is clarity, knowing I wasn't crazy, that the betrayal was real, and that I faced it head on. I can live with that. I stopped recording and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was clearing, the last traces of storm drifting away. The world felt lighter somehow, though I knew the scars would stay. Grace appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I am," I said. "For the first time in a long time." She smiled, stepping beside me to look out at the water. "It's beautiful tonight." "Yes," I said, "it finally is." Hours later, after she'd gone to bed, I turned off the lights and stood in the darkness of the study. The hum of the city outside was distant, gentle. I ran my fingers across the framed photo of Aaron and Grace as children, the one I'd turned face down months ago. I set it upright again. Some battles aren't about destroying enemies. They're about remembering who you are when the smoke clears. And for the first time, I recognized the man in the photograph. It was 1 week after the final ruling when I finally allowed myself to sleep past sunrise. For months, my body had been tuned to alarm bells, legal filings, court dates, phone calls from Peter, or the endless ache of waiting for justice that might never come. But that morning, the house was quiet, and for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace, not punishment. The coffee brewed in the kitchen as sunlight poured through the bay windows, warm and golden. Grace was already there, barefoot, reading the paper. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You actually slept," she said. "I did," I replied, pouring a cup. "I even dreamed. I think that's progress." She grinned. "A whole new man." "Not new," I said, taking a sip. "Just lighter." Outside, the sound of seagulls drifted from the water. And for a brief moment, I thought about everything that had happened: the wedding, the humiliation, the lawsuits, the endless unraveling of lies. And yet, standing there, none of it felt as heavy as it once had. It was like remembering someone else's storm after you've already walked into the sun. Grace folded the newspaper and looked at me with that quiet intensity she'd inherited from me. "You know," she said softly, "the news is calling you a symbol of perseverance, a father who fought back." I chuckled. "Symbols are for statues. I'm just a man who refused to disappear." Later that day, Aaron came by. He parked in the same driveway he hadn't set foot on since the day he moved in with Lila. I watched from the porch as he stepped out, hesitant but composed. He carried nothing with him, not even a jacket, just a look of quiet resolve. "Dad," he said, standing a few feet away. "Aaron," I answered. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy with everything unsaid. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I know. Sorry isn't enough, but I need to say it anyway." I nodded, letting the silence fill what words couldn't. "You've already started fixing things," I said. "The testimony, your honesty, that was the apology." He looked down, voice barely audible. "I just wish it hadn't taken losing everything to understand." "That's how most lessons arrive," I said. "Late, painful, but unforgettable." He finally met my eyes. "Do you think one day we can start over?" I smiled faintly. "One day at a time, son. That's the only way anything real is built." He stepped forward then, and for the first time in years, I hugged my son. No anger, no tension. Just two men holding the fragile thread of something worth mending. When we pulled apart, I saw tears in his eyes, and for once, I didn't hide mine. That evening, the three of us had dinner together. Nothing grand, just grilled salmon rice, and the kind of easy laughter that had been missing for too long. Grace teased Aaron about his awful cooking. Aaron rolled his eyes, and I listened quietly, absorbing the rhythm of normalcy I thought I'd lost forever. At one point, Aaron looked around the room, his gaze falling on the old photographs still hanging on the wall. "You kept them," he said softly. "Of course," I replied. "You don't erase family, Aaron. You rebuild it." He nodded, his voice tight. "Then maybe I can earn my place in those pictures again." Grace reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You already have." After they left that night, I walked down to the dock behind the house. The water shimmered under the moonlight, soft waves lapping against the wooden posts. The air smelled of salt and pine. I stood there for a long while, listening to the hum of the city in the distance, feeling the quiet pulse of the earth beneath my feet. So much had been taken, trust, love, time. But what remained felt stronger because it had been tested. In the reflection of the water, I saw my own face, older lined, but unbroken. I thought about Margaret, somewhere far away, living with the weight of her own choices. I didn't feel hatred anymore, only distance. Some wounds don't need vengeance to close. They just need truth and time. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. "You did it, old man," I whispered to myself. "You made it through." A few days later, Peter stopped by one last time with final documents. "Everything's settled," he said. "The restitution's been processed, the trust is in full effect, and the company's under your and Grace's management." I signed the final signature, the ink smooth beneath my hand. "It feels strange," I admitted. Winning. Peter smiled. You didn't win, Rick. You restored balance. That's rarer and harder. He closed his briefcase, then paused at the door. You know, he said, people will talk about this story for a long time. About how you fought back when everyone thought you'd been beaten. I chuckled. Let them talk. Just make sure they get the lesson right. And what's that, he asked. That no matter how far someone tries to erase you, truth always redraws the lines. That night, I opened my recorder for the last time. The red light blinked steady and soft. Day 100, I said. The story ends here. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in peace. The truth came out. The lies collapsed. My children came home. That's enough. I paused, my voice low, almost a whisper. If anyone's listening, remember this. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about restoration, about rebuilding what was broken piece by piece until the noise fades and only clarity remains. I clicked the recorder off and set it beside the photograph of Aaron and Grace as children, the one I'd turned upright again. Outside, the sea wind rustled the trees and the world felt steady. When I walked out to the porch, I saw the first streaks of dawn rising over the bay, painting the sky gold and blue. The war was over, and all that remained was the quiet dignity of survival. I sipped my coffee and smiled. Here's to beginnings, I murmured. Then I turned toward the horizon and let the morning light wash over me. Did you feel something in this story? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you believe truth always finds its way, hit like and subscribe for more life stories like this one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story with love, respect, and another lesson from life itself.